The evening started like any other Friday at Bella Vista, the Italian restaurant my sister Carla managed with the kind of theatrical flair that made customers feel like they were dining in her personal kingdom. She swept between tables in her designer dress, air-kissing regulars and commanding the staff with imperious gestures that suggested she owned not just the restaurant, but possibly the entire block. I worked the kitchen as a line cook, arriving early each morning to prep vegetables and staying late to clean equipment. To anyone watching, I was just another employee grinding through shifts for hourly wages. Carla made sure everyone knew the hierarchy. She introduced herself to new customers as the owner, wore custom name tags reading proprietor, and kept her office door marked with a brass nameplate declaring Carla Martinez owner/manager. The arrangement had worked for 3 years. Carla got to play successful restaurateur while I learned the business from the ground up, working every position from dishwasher to sous chef. Our parents bragged endlessly about their entrepreneurial daughter who built a restaurant empire from nothing, while treating me like the family disappointment who couldn't even keep a real job. What nobody knew was that Bella Vista belonged to me through Rodriguez Holdings LC, a company I'd established after selling a small tech startup I'd built in college. The $800,000 sale gave me enough capital to purchase the struggling restaurant, renovate it completely and hire Carla as general manager. She had culinary school credentials and restaurant experience, while I preferred staying behind the scenes learning operations. The legal documents were clear. Carla received a generous salary plus performance bonuses, but ownership remained entirely with Rodriguez Holdings. She could make daily operational decisions, but major changes required approval from the ownership entity. We'd structured it this way so she could gain management experience while I mastered the restaurant business without family drama about my luck or unfair advantages. Carla knew about my startup sale but assumed I'd blown the money on computer toys and gadgets, like she told everyone. She believed the restaurant financing came from investor connections she'd impressed during her job interviews. I never corrected the story, partly because it kept family dynamics simpler, and partly because I wanted to see if she could run the business successfully without ego complications. For 3 years, this arrangement allowed me to learn every aspect of restaurant operations while Carla managed front-of-house operations and staff scheduling. I worked alongside longtime employees who treated me like any other cook, never suspecting the quiet guy prepping vegetables actually owned their workplace. The accountant, lawyer, and bank knew the truth, but I'd specifically requested they handle all owner communications directly with me, not through management. The system worked until Carla started believing her own performance too completely. The trouble began 6 months earlier when Carla hired her boyfriend Derek as assistant manager. Derek brought an aggressive management style that included shouting at staff, cutting labor costs through skeleton crews, and implementing efficiency measures that prioritized speed over food quality. Customer complaints increased, but Carla dismissed them as adjustment periods, while Derek pushed harder on cost-cutting measures. I tried addressing the issues through subtle suggestions during staff meetings, but Derek would override any input from kitchen staff, with condescending explanations about management decisions and business priorities. Carla supported him completely, treating my operational experience as irrelevant compared to his business education and leadership training. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal dinner rush when Derek decided to implement a new plate optimization system requiring portion sizes 30% smaller than our established recipes. I tried explaining that regular customers would notice immediately, but Derek insisted food costs were destroying profitability, and portion control was basic business management. By 7 p.m., the dining room was packed with Friday night regulars who'd been coming to Bella Vista for years. The first few tables immediately noticed the smaller portions, with longtime customers asking servers if something was wrong with their orders. I watched through the kitchen pass as confusion spread through the dining room, but Derek refused to adjust the new policy. Mrs. Henderson, a weekly regular who always ordered our signature pasta dish, called her server over with obvious concern. "Excuse me, honey, I think you brought me the wrong order. This looks like a child's portion." The server, obviously embarrassed, explained the new refined presentation policy while Mrs. Henderson's face shifted from confusion to disappointment. When I suggested we return to standard portions for customer satisfaction, Derek exploded in front of the entire kitchen staff. "You're a line cook, not a business manager. Stick to following orders instead of questioning decisions above your pay grade. The other cooks stared uncomfortably while Derek continued his tirade about knowing your place and respecting the chain of command. Carla appeared in the kitchen doorway during Derek's speech, nodding approvingly at his leadership demonstration. She added her own commentary about some employees overstepping boundaries and needing to remember who makes the real decisions around here. The kitchen fell silent as other staff members suddenly found their prep work fascinating. But the real explosion came when Mrs. Henderson approached the kitchen past directly, something she'd never done in 3 years of regular dining. She politely asked if there was a manager available because she was concerned about the significant change in portion sizes. Derek immediately stepped forward, treating her question as a personal challenge to his authority. "Ma'am, we've implemented industry-standard portion control to improve our business efficiency," Derek announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "If you're unsatisfied with our portions, perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a lower-end establishment that prioritizes quantity over quality." The dining room went absolutely silent. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red as Derek continued his lecture about appropriate customer expectations and maintaining operational standards. Other customers started staring, their own meals forgotten as they witnessed this unprecedented display of customer service hostility. That's when I quietly stepped forward and offered to prepare Mrs. Henderson's usual portion size at no additional charge. It seemed like basic customer service for a long-time regular who'd never complained about anything in 3 years of visits. Derek's reaction was immediate and explosive. "Absolutely not. You don't have authority to override management decisions or offer unauthorized discounts. This is exactly the kind of employee overreach that destroys business profitability." The entire restaurant was watching now. Kitchen staff, servers, busboys, and every single customer had stopped their activities to observe this escalating confrontation. I could see phones being discreetly positioned to record whatever happened next, while Mrs. Henderson looked mortified at causing such a scene. Carla chose that moment to make her grand entrance, sweeping into the kitchen with all the dramatic flair she could muster in front of her audience. She'd clearly decided this was her opportunity to demonstrate decisive leadership and put her rebellious employee in his proper place once and for all. "What is going on in my kitchen?" Carla's voice carried across the entire restaurant as she positioned herself center stage, hands on hips, surveying the scene like a queen addressing unruly subjects. Derek immediately launched into his version of events, portraying himself as the reasonable manager trying to implement basic business standards, while dealing with employee insubordination and customer manipulation. He painted me as a troublemaker who regularly questioned authority and encouraged customers to complain about perfectly reasonable policies. Carla listened with theatrical concern, nodding gravely at each accusation while ensuring her performance was visible to the packed dining room. She was clearly relishing this moment of absolute authority, finally able to demonstrate her ownership status in front of customers, staff, and particularly me. "I am absolutely appalled by this behavior," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. "This is exactly why restaurants fail, when employees think they can override management decisions and undermine business operations." She turned toward me with the kind of dramatic pause she'd probably practiced in management training seminars. "You have consistently overstepped your boundaries, questioned our policies, and now you're openly defying direct orders from management in front of customers." The dining room was absolutely silent except for the soft ping of phones recording the confrontation. Mrs. Henderson looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wishing she'd never mentioned the portion size issue. Other longtime customers watched with obvious concern, some recognizing this wasn't typical Bella Vista behavior. "You're fired. Get out of my restaurant now." Carla's voice reached every corner of the dining room, causing several customers to visibly flinch. "Pack your things and leave immediately. We don't tolerate insubordination from kitchen staff." The silence that followed was deafening. Servers stood frozen with plates in their hands, other kitchen staff stared at their stations, and customers sat motionless with forks halfway to their mouths. The only sound was the gentle hum of the ventilation system and someone's phone buzzing with notifications. I untied my apron slowly, folded it neatly, and placed it on the pass counter. The simple action felt surreal after 3 years of working in this kitchen, learning every recipe, training every new cook, and quietly maintaining operations while Carla managed the front of house. I understand, I said simply, my voice calm and steady despite the circumstances. I'll collect my personal items. I walked through the kitchen toward the back office, passing co-workers who avoided eye contact while Carla continued her performance for the dining room audience. Derek stood beside her with obvious satisfaction, clearly enjoying this demonstration of managerial authority and decisive leadership. In the back office, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my phone. The contact I needed was already in my favorites list. Maria Santos, CPA, Rodriguez Holdings LLC. She'd been handling the restaurant's books since day one and knew exactly what had just happened because she was having dinner in the main dining room with her husband. The call connected immediately. I saw everything, Maria said quietly. Are you ready to make the ownership change? It's time, I replied. Please come to the back office. I sat quietly in the office for exactly 5 minutes, listening to the muffled sounds of a restaurant trying to resume normal operations after such an extraordinary scene. Servers were attempting to reassure customers, kitchen staff was working with obvious tension, and I could hear Carla's voice explaining to various tables that she'd handled a personnel issue decisively. When Maria entered the office, she was carrying her purse and a folder of documents that I recognized immediately. These were the ownership papers, management agreements, and financial records that clearly established Rodriguez Holdings LLC as the sole proprietor of Bella Vista restaurant. Should I explain it to her here, or would you prefer the dining room? Maria asked, her voice professional but tinged with the satisfaction of someone who'd watched my sister's performance for 3 years while knowing the truth. She made this public, I replied. Let's finish it publicly. We walked back through the kitchen together, past staff members who were obviously curious about why the fired employee was returning with someone carrying official documents. The dining room was still tense, with customers picking at their food while obviously discussing the unprecedented scene they'd witnessed. Carla was at table 12, explaining to the Morrison family about the difficult personnel decisions required in restaurant management and how ownership sometimes requires tough choices. She was clearly enjoying the role of decisive leader dealing with employee problems. Maria approached the table directly. Excuse me, Ms. Martinez. I need to speak with you about a business matter. Carla turned with obvious annoyance at the interruption, clearly not recognizing Maria despite her regular presence handling the restaurant's finances. I'm speaking with valued customers right now. Whatever employee issue you're concerned about, it's been handled appropriately. Ma'am, Maria said clearly, her accountant's voice carrying across nearby tables, you just fired the owner. The silence was immediate and complete. Carla's face went from annoyance to confusion to something approaching panic as she processed what she'd just heard. Derek, who'd been standing nearby basking in management success, suddenly looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. I'm Maria Santos, CPA for Rodriguez Holdings LLC, she continued, pulling documents from her folder. This restaurant belongs to your brother through his holding company. You are the general manager, not the owner. She placed the documents on the table where the Morrison family could see the official letterhead and legal language. These are the ownership papers filed with the state, the LLC registration, and the management agreement that established your position here. Carla's face had gone completely white. She looked at the documents, then at me, then back at Maria, her mouth opening and closing without any sound emerging. The confident restaurant owner who'd been commanding the dining room 5 minutes earlier had vanished completely. The management agreement specifically states that terminating the owner is grounds for immediate contract violation, Maria continued in her professional voice. I'll need to schedule a meeting to discuss your employment status. Derek had backed away from the table, clearly trying to distance himself from the situation as quickly as possible. Other customers were staring openly now, phones definitely recording this unprecedented reversal of fortune. Ma'am, you just fired the owner, Maria repeated, ensuring everyone in the dining room understood exactly what had happened. Mrs. Henderson, still sitting at her table with the smaller portion, looked absolutely stunned. The Morrison family was staring at the legal documents while trying to process what they'd witnessed. Servers stood frozen between tables, unsure whether to continue normal operations or wait for some kind of resolution. The kitchen staff had gathered at the pass, watching the dining room drama unfold while trying to understand how their quiet coworker had suddenly become their boss. 3 years of assumptions about hierarchy, authority, and ownership had just been completely overturned in the span of 5 minutes. Carla finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "But, you work in the kitchen?" "I worked in the kitchen to learn the business," I replied calmly. "The same way you manage the front of house to gain experience. The difference is I never forgot who actually owned the restaurant." The implications were settling in throughout the dining room. Customers were realizing they'd witnessed a manager fire her own boss. Staff members were understanding that their quiet coworker was actually their employer. And Carla was confronting the reality that her 3-year performance as restaurant owner had just collapsed in front of everyone she'd been trying to impress. "We'll need to discuss Derek's employment status as well," Maria added, glancing toward where he'd been standing before discreetly retreating toward the kitchen. "His management decisions have been flagged for review by the ownership entity." The restaurant sat in stunned silence as the full scope of the situation became clear. The authority structure everyone had assumed was real had just been revealed as completely fictional. The confident manager who'd been making decisive leadership demonstrations was actually an employee who'd just violated her contract by firing her boss. And in the middle of it all, Mrs. Henderson still sat with her smaller portion, the simple complaint about food size having triggered the most dramatic ownership revelation in Bella Vista's history. The next morning, I arrived at Bella Vista at my usual 6 a.m. time to find the kitchen staff already assembled and waiting. Word had spread through the restaurant community overnight, and everyone wanted to understand what would happen next. The dramatic firing and ownership revelation had become the talk of every server, cook, and manager in the city. Maria had scheduled individual meetings with each staff member to explain the situation and confirm their employment status. Most of the kitchen crew had worked with me for years and were more curious than concerned, but the front-of-house staff who'd been hired by Carla were understandably nervous about their positions. Derek had submitted his resignation by email at 3 a.m., citing irreconcilable differences with ownership management philosophy and pursuing opportunities more aligned with his leadership style. His efficiency measures were immediately suspended, portion sizes returned to original specifications, and the aggressive cost-cutting policies were replaced with customer service priorities. Carla didn't show up for her scheduled meeting with Maria. Instead, she sent a text message claiming she was exploring legal options and consulting with business attorneys about ownership disputes. The message also mentioned family discussions about appropriate roles and responsibilities. By lunchtime, word about the previous night's events had spread throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson returned with 3 friends, specifically requesting to sit at the same table where she'd witnessed the ownership revelation. She ordered her usual pasta dish and made a point of commenting loudly about the proper portion size and excellent customer service. The Morrison family also returned, bringing extended family members who wanted to eat at the restaurant where that crazy thing happened last night. They asked their server to point out which table had been ground zero for the ownership reveal and took selfies sitting where they could see the kitchen pass. Social media had picked up the story through customer posts and staff sharing, with #BellaVistaFiring trending locally and videos of the confrontation being shared across restaurant industry groups. The story was being discussed as a case study in family business complications and the importance of clear ownership documentation. Local food bloggers started calling for interviews about the most dramatic restaurant revelation in city history. Business publications wanted to discuss the operational implications of ownership concealment and management authority structures. The story was evolving into a broader conversation about family businesses and professional boundaries. But the most significant change was in daily operations. Without Derek's aggressive policies and Carla's theatrical management style, the restaurant settled into a calmer rhythm focused on food quality and customer satisfaction. Staff members relaxed into their roles, customer complaints disappeared, and the working environment improved dramatically. I promoted our longtime sous chef to kitchen manager and elevated 2 experienced servers to shift supervisors, creating a management structure based on competence and experience rather than family connections or dramatic presentations. The new team implemented operational improvements that had been delayed or dismissed under the previous management approach. 3 days later, Carla finally appeared for a meeting with Maria and myself. Gone was the confident restaurant owner persona, replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in days. She'd clearly spent the time consulting lawyers and discovering that the ownership documentation was absolutely solid and legally unassailable. "I want to discuss my position here," she said quietly, her voice completely different from the theatrical projection she'd used while managing the dining room. "Your position is whatever you'd like it to be," I replied. "You're an excellent front-of-house manager when you focus on operations instead of performance. The job is yours if you want it, with the understanding that it's a management position, not ownership." She looked at the table for a long moment before responding. "I don't think I can work here anymore. Too many people saw what happened. I'll never have credibility with staff or customers." That was probably true. The dining room revelation had been so public and dramatic that resuming normal management would be nearly impossible. Everyone would remember the moment when the confident owner was revealed as an employee who'd just fired her boss. We worked out a generous severance package that included excellent references for her culinary skills and management experience. Maria helped structure the departure to minimize complications, and Carla agreed to a non-disclosure agreement about the operational details of our family business arrangement. 2 weeks later, Bella Vista had settled into its new normal. The staff operated smoothly under distributed management, customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, and the dramatic ownership revelation had become a legendary story in local restaurant circles. Mrs. Henderson became a regular spokesperson for the restaurant, telling anyone who would listen about the most amazing customer service recovery she'd ever witnessed. She turned her portion size complaint into a neighborhood story about family business drama and excellent conflict resolution. The Morrison family brought business associates to the restaurant with the incredible story, and made dining at Bella Vista part of their entertainment routine. They'd request tables near where the ownership revelation had occurred and share the story with guests who hadn't witnessed the original events. 6 months later, I received a text from Carla announcing she'd been hired as general manager for a new restaurant across town. Her references had helped her land the position, and she was excited about managing operations without the complication of family dynamics or ownership confusion. The message included an apology for the public confrontation and an admission that she'd gotten carried away with the owner performance and lost sight of the business partnership we'd originally planned. She acknowledged that my approach of learning operations while maintaining ownership had been smarter than her assumption about management authority. Derek had taken a position with a corporate restaurant chain where his efficiency measures and aggressive management style were apparently more appreciated. His LinkedIn profile described his Bella Vista experience as implementing operational improvements in family business environment, without mentioning the dramatic conclusion of his employment. Today, Bella Vista operates as the neighborhood restaurant it was always meant to be. The ownership structure is no longer secret, though most customers and staff still find it remarkable that their quiet former line cook actually owned the place all along. The story has become part of local restaurant folklore, shared among industry professionals as a cautionary tale about assumptions, authority, and the importance of understanding actual business relationships rather than dramatic presentations. And Mrs. Henderson still comes in every Friday, always ordering her pasta dish and always commenting approvingly about the portion size. She's never let anyone forget that her simple complaint about food quantity triggered the most dramatic ownership revelation in the city's restaurant history. The lesson learned wasn't just about business ownership or family dynamics. It was about the difference between performing authority and actually possessing it, between demanding respect and earning it, and between making dramatic gestures and building something real. Sometimes the person who appears to have the least power is actually the one who controls everything. And sometimes the most important business lessons are learned not in management seminars or business school, but by working quietly alongside the people who make the operation successful every single day. The quiet cook who preps vegetables at 6 a.m. might just own the entire restaurant. And the confident manager making dramatic speeches might just be an employee who's about to learn that authority without ownership is just performance art.